I can't believe you did this, Dad. Layla's voice cracked through the small kitchen, where the once white ceramic tiles had faded with age. She stood motionless before the dining table, an old oak piece her mother had polished and protected for nearly 20 years. Now, it had become where a life-altering decision lay bare and cold, like the stark black and white contract tilted on the surface. Her father didn't meet her eyes. He lowered his head, his hand trembling slightly as he tried to lift the teacup to his lips, but paused. I had no other choice, Layla. Tomorrow, the bank will repossess the bakery. This house will be taken next week. She inhaled deeply, her fingers tightening around the contract paper. So, he bought our entire family with a single signature? It wasn't buying, he whispered. It was helping. Layla let out a bitter laugh, sharp and cutting. He needs a beautiful, educated wife with some artistic vision. Enough to decorate the moral portfolio he's polishing for the shareholders. And you needed to pay your debts, so you sold your daughter. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in front of the aging man who used to bike 20 miles daily to deliver sweet pastries to her school during finals. But this wound wasn't from a stranger. It came from the one place she thought was safest. What's his name? Her father finally looked up and swallowed hard. Ethan Whitmore. The name rang out like a foreign but powerful bell. Layla knew him. He was the CEO of Whitmore Dynamics, a self-made billionaire out of Chicago, handsome as a sculpture, but with a reputation in the investment world as cold-blooded. And now, that man wanted her as his wife, just for 12 months, per the contract. After that, divorce. All debts wiped clean. She'd receive a large settlement, enough to start over if she wanted. I can't do this. Layla. Her father's voice was hoarse. I know I have no right to beg, but your mother died fighting to keep the bakery. It was her dream, her legacy, a part of this family's soul. If you say no, his voice caught in his throat, everything will be gone. Outside the window, streetlights shone faintly through the thin curtains. Layla turned her face away, hiding the tears welling in her eyes. 12 months only. He nodded. All the terms are right there. Ethan is coming to New Orleans this weekend. They want to hold the wedding next week to squash the rumors that he doesn't like women. Layla slowly closed her eyes. She had dreamed of a radiant love, a man who would hold her hand as they stepped into her first gallery, where the jewelry collection named after her mother glowed under soft golden light. Not a contract with clauses, an expiration date, and a name as cold as steel. But life rarely lets you choose what you want when the people you love need your sacrifice. The beige suitcase sat quietly in the corner. Layla couldn't remember the last time she packed. Maybe when she left design school in Atlanta, full of excitement to return to New Orleans. Now, dresses, hair clips, and rough sketches lay scattered in that suitcase, ready to follow her into a life of luxury, unfamiliar, and not hers. She didn't love Ethan Whitmore, but now she was about to become his wife. And maybe, sometimes, the marriages that don't start with love are the ones where love is tested beyond emotion. If you've ever wondered, can a heart learn to love when it starts with a contract? Then keep following the story of Layla and Ethan. A pretend marriage, a cold beginning, but who knows? Maybe the spark will ignite in the place we least expect. Don't forget to tap the heart, leave your thoughts in the comments, and follow the channel so you won't miss the next episode of the series The Arrangement. We'll find out whether love can grow from a contract, or is it just a fragile illusion in this world of cold calculations? The soft, rhythmic sound of wheels rolling over the stone-paved streets of Chicago's Gold Coast echoed like Layla's heartbeat, steady, restrained. She sat still in the back seat of a sleek black Cadillac, both hands resting on her elegant cream-colored dress, a design she had sewn herself during a sleepless night. Not because it was a wedding dress. No, it was just the perfect outer shell for a product about to be displayed. The ornate iron gates opened before her, slowly and proudly, as if programmed to welcome only those familiar with power. The Whitmore estate emerged through a light veil of mist, an angular, modern structure, clad in silver-gray granite, so cold and polished it seemed even light was hesitant to touch it. Layla tightened her grip on the bag strap. She hadn't brought much, just a few outfits, her drawing kit, and a metal mask her mother had made for her last birthday. The only gift her mother had left behind was a reminder that no matter how much life tried to silence her, art would always remain her voice. The woman waiting at the door did not smile or offer her name. "This way, Miss Brooks. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you in the study." Like a scene rehearsed dozens of times, Layla stepped into a space soaked with the scent of aged wood and dried ginger. The house was so vast that her heels echoed, as though her presence were answering back. The door to the study was slightly ajar, revealing a tall figure standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. The late afternoon light spilled across his neatly cut light brown hair, the sharp lines of his tailored suit hugging broad, solid shoulders. It was him, Ethan Whitmore. "Your fiancé has arrived, sir," the housekeeper said before quietly closing the door behind her. Ethan turned. One look was enough to understand. This man did not belong to the world of emotions. Steel-gray eyes, void of warmth, a chiseled jaw, lips pressed in a line. He didn't look at her like a woman. He looked at her like a problem that had already been solved. "Layla Brooks," he said, voice deep and crisp, as though each word had been weighed before leaving his lips. "You fit the role better than I expected." Layla didn't respond. She tilted her head in a polite, almost mechanical nod. "I'm not merchandise," she said, "even if I'm wrapped in silk or solid gold." A flicker of surprise passed Ethan's face, but vanished as quickly as it came. He walked to the table, poured himself a glass of whiskey. The scent of oak instantly filled the room, then leaned casually against the edge of the desk. "We both know why you're here, Layla. I need a wife impressive enough to shut down rumors the shareholders are whispering. You need to save your family." He raised his glass toward her, like a toast without sentiment. "Marriage contract. 12 months. Sign. Live together. Divorce. Done." She stepped slowly toward the desk, eyes fixed on his arrogant face. "Do you know what it feels like to wear a wedding dress with no groom, no friends, not even a blessing?" Ethan gave a faint laugh, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "I once closed an $800 million deal with a handshake in a parking lot. A fake wedding isn't the worst thing I've done." Layla didn't reply. Instead, she placed a small box on the desk. Inside was a pair of brass earrings, simple in design, yet sharp in detail. "I don't know what these next 12 months will bring, but at the very least, I won't let you be the one who makes all the decisions." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but didn't stop her as she turned and left the room. 3 days later, the wedding was quiet, discreet, and entirely devoid of love. Layla stood in the cold white hall of an old-style church, beside the father who couldn't quite hide the sorrow in his eyes. She wore a simple, well-fitted white dress, but inside, it felt like she was draped in a skin that didn't belong to her. Layla felt she was signing her soul away when her father placed her hand into Ethan's. The priest read the vows. They repeated the words. And when it came to, "Do you," Ethan answered swiftly, like he was signing off the last contract of the day. So did Layla. No one looked at each other. No one smiled. When Ethan's lips brushed her cheek, just as the procedure required, A flashbulb popped outside the stained glass window. A paparazzi had captured the moment. That image, two figures like marble statues, perfect and frozen, would grace the front page the next morning, alongside the headline, "Ethan Whitmore finally marries. But who is the mysterious woman?" Layla didn't care. As Ethan's hand rested against her back, cold as the silence he'd maintained throughout the ceremony, she had only one thought: I don't love him, and I never will. What she didn't know was that sometimes the firmest declarations are the things life loves to overturn first. They say time brings strangers closer, but in the cold, gray stone house of Ethan Whitmore, time only made the silence thicker. 3 weeks after the wedding, Layla began learning to breathe in emptiness. She woke up early, made her coffee, and sat by the glass window overlooking the backyard, where bare birch trees reached their pale limbs into the bleak March sky of Chicago. The house was so vast that every step she took echoed in triplets of loneliness. Ethan always vanished early. Meetings, calls, emails filled with symbols and numbers were his world. A world with no room for fabric pins, crystal beads, or the idea of a pair of earrings inspired by the spiral of a seashell. She had asked him once, in the brightly lit breakfast room, "Do you ever really listen to anyone?" Ethan had looked up from his iPad, brow faintly furrowed. Listening is an overly romanticized concept. She never asked again. Her room was at the far end of the south hallway, nearly 40 steps away from his. Ethan had called it a convenient arrangement for both. Layla didn't object. Everyone needs a place to remove their mask, and distance is sometimes the kindest way to survive in a marriage without emotion. But one night, everything changed. A heavy rain poured over Chicago. Thunder cracked violently, slashing the sky with silver blades. Layla couldn't sleep. She left her room, walking down the hall, hoping a cup of hot tea might soothe the cold gnawing in her chest. As she passed Ethan's room, a strange sound caught her ear. Something falling. Then a sharp, broken breath. She stopped. The door was ajar. She hadn't meant to go in, but her instincts told her something was wrong. Layla gently pushed the door open, and for the first time, she saw Ethan as she'd never seen him. He was collapsed on the floor, back against the wall, shirt unbuttoned, sweat soaking his brow. His right hand gripped the arm of a chair, lips clenched as if holding back a scream. His eyes were wide open, but he didn't see her. It was as if he were staring into a place far away, long ago, one he couldn't escape. "Ethan," she whispered. No response. Layla stepped closer, closer still, then quietly knelt beside him. Her hand touched his chest for the first time, not out of duty, not for image, but for life. "Ethan, you're having a panic attack. Look at me," he gasped, shaking his head violently. "No, not the car. Mom. Blood. I wasn't driving. She couldn't catch all his words, but she understood the fear. That thunderclap hadn't just shaken the sky, it had shaken the scar inside him. Layla gently touched his cheek, warm and soft like a silent prayer. "Ethan, this is now. This is the present. There's no blood, no car, no mom, just me and you and the rain out there." His breathing slowly began to steady, as if being pulled back. A long moment later, he whispered, his voice so hoarse she almost missed it. "I couldn't save her. I fought with my mom that day. I left. It was raining. The car skidded. She didn't survive." Layla said nothing. She just sat beside him. That night, the room was no longer a space of distance. but a place to mend. No promises, no kisses, just two people, two worlds, finding peace in each other's brokenness. The next morning, when she woke up on the living room couch, there was a note on the table. "Thank you. I'm not good at expressing things." But I noticed. No signature was needed. She knew who it was from. In the days that followed, Ethan didn't change overnight. He still left early, still answered emails at midnight. But something had softened. A nod when she entered the room. A cup of ginger tea was waiting on her sketch table. A glance that lingered a little longer than it should have when she laughed with the gardener. They weren't strangers anymore, but not yet close. It was just a beginning. Nameless, unplanned, but not meaningless. Layla didn't know what was forming between them. But one thing she knew for sure. The man she thought was a wall of stone had started to crack. And from those cracks, perhaps, light was beginning to seep in. The dressing room at the Langham Hotel glowed with soft light, casting a warm golden hue over the deep purple velvet curtains behind her. On the leather armchair, a turquoise satin gown shimmered beneath Layla's hands, as if it were breathing, light, soft, alive. Tonight marked the 10th anniversary celebration of the Social Investment Fund sponsored by Whitmore Dynamics. Ethan would appear as the founder, the host of the charity auction, and as her husband. Layla tilted her head in front of the mirror. The glass reflected an image she barely recognized. A sleek high bun, plum-red lips exuding power, classic gold earrings swaying gently with each movement. She looked more like a high-fashion businesswoman than a jewelry artisan who once made a living selling handmade necklaces at the French market. That was what Ethan wanted. "You need to shine," he'd said that morning, placing a blue velvet box on the table. Inside was a Cartier necklace, delicate as an unspoken promise. She didn't know what he was trying to achieve, nor was she sure his recent gestures of kindness were genuine, or just part of a polished PR strategy. But one thing she knew for sure. If she were going to stand under the flashbulbs tonight, she wouldn't flinch. The ballroom opened like a perfectly choreographed scene. Sparkling glasses of champagne, a string quartet playing gently, ceiling lights glimmering like an upside-down galaxy, CEOs, investors, journalists, stylists, social activists, all blending into a symphony of power and image. Ethan walked beside Layla, his gaze scanning faces like a chess player planning 3 moves. He spoke enough and said the right things, making every conversation around them feel like a rehearsal. Layla didn't speak much. She smiled, nodded, but kept her distance. Not because she was cold, but in this world, she still didn't know where she stood, companion or temporary accessory. Then came the media. A row of cameras and microphones lined up. Ethan stepped forward, as always. His statement was brief, steady, delivered in a deep, smooth tone that hushed the crowd like a classical symphony. Then it was Layla's turn. A platinum blonde reporter from Verité, sharp eyes, poised smile, stepped forward. But the smile didn't reach any place. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice velvet over a razor blade. "How does it feel to be the first woman of color to join the ranks of the Whitmore wives?" The room fell silent. The question wasn't impolite, but it slipped a needle between dignity and identity. Ethan tilted his head, as if about to speak, but Layla stepped forward half a pace. Her gaze was calm but unwavering. Her voice was soft, yet each word rang like crystal poured into glass. "Unfortunately, the first question isn't about the social projects we're working hard on, but about my skin color." She paused, lips curving slightly. "But since you asked, I'll answer. I feel proud, not because I've made it somewhere, but because I've never needed to change who I am to deserve any place, be it a home, a stage, or a heart. A faint gasp slipped from the front row. The reporter flushed slightly, though she kept her fixed smile. Ethan looked at Layla, and in his eyes, something appeared for the first time. Not admiration, not gratitude, but realization. She didn't need him to protect her. Layla Brooks knew how to stand tall, in stilettos, with a will no one could bend. The auction flowed smoothly. Per their agreement, Layla didn't sit beside Ethan at the head table. She chose a seat near the back, close to the young artists, where she could be herself, hear about painting programs for deaf people, and dip her fingers into unfinished sketches. Layla was surprised when one of the items announced was the Eclipse necklace, a piece she had designed the year before. "Mr. Whitmore opens with $50,000, the host declared. She turned. Ethan was staring straight at her, unblinking. She didn't know whether to feel touched or cautious. By the time they returned home, it was late. Layla removed her heels and rubbed her wrist, still marking where the necklace's clasp had pressed. She was heading upstairs quietly when she saw Ethan waiting at the bottom of the staircase. "You were impressive tonight," he said. "Why did you buy that piece?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I just wanted to keep something that truly belongs to you in this house full of things that don't." She nodded. "But I won't let myself be kept, Ethan. You can buy a necklace, but you can't buy me." Ethan nodded slightly. For the first time, no argument, no sarcasm, no rationalization. She walked up the stairs without looking back. Inside her, there wasn't anger or resentment. It was a quiet awareness. In a world of men like him, where money and power dictate everything, every time she said no, she built her throne. And tonight, beneath glittering lights and 1,000 watching eyes, Layla Brooks had stepped onto that throne, without anyone needing to crown her. That morning in Chicago was strangely peaceful. The sun hadn't risen high yet, but light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft golden layer over the warm wooden floors. In the white marble-tiled kitchen, the kettle let out a gentle hiss, timid, yet familiar. Layla stood by the stove, her hair loosely tied at the nape of her neck, wearing an oversized white button-down shirt that she guessed belonged to Ethan. A chance discovery from the freshly laundered closet. It carried a faint scent of sandalwood and clean soap, distinctly masculine. A feeling both foreign and safe. She slipped it on almost unconsciously. Not to create intimacy, but because, for the first time in weeks, she wanted to try feeling comfortable in what was supposed to be her own home. Ethan walked in just as she was stirring her second cup of coffee. Gray t-shirt, sweatpants, hair unbrushed. A very different Ethan Whitmore, not the polished figure from Forbes covers, not the sharp-edged man in investment meetings. Just a man who had just woken up, voice still husky, looking slightly surprised to find his wife in the kitchen. Layla looked at him through the rim of her mug. "You're up early." "Never got used to sleeping in," Ethan replied, pouring himself a glass of water. "And you're dressed like this. Is this your house?" She raised an eyebrow, voice calm. "You say that like I'm not allowed to." "That's not what I meant," he said, pausing. "You just look different. In a good way." A long pause. Not awkward, just unfamiliar. That morning, for the first time, they had breakfast together. No housekeeper, assistants, or schedules wedged between spoonfuls of oatmeal and passing glances. Just two people, two warm bowls of oats, and soft jazz humming from the ceiling speakers. Ethan told her about when he learned clarinet to impress an 8th-grade classmate. Layla burst out laughing. I can't picture a world-class investment CEO playing clarinet for a girl with curly hair. Yeah. She rejected me after exactly 3 weeks. Why? Because I played the wrong note during the recital. Layla laughed, genuinely, not forced and not guarded, not reserved like at the galas. They had walked through side by side. Ethan paused, then said softly, It's been a long time since I've heard you laugh like that. That line, so gentle, made her pause. Maybe because she hadn't thought he noticed, or perhaps because she never believed her laughter mattered enough to be remembered. That afternoon, Layla went to the small studio she had built at the back of the yard, a glass room surrounded by lilacs, where natural light poured onto her canvases like silent streams. She was working on a new collection, fracture lines, inspired by the cracks in Japanese kintsugi pottery, where people mend broken pieces with gold, making them more valuable for being broken. Ethan came looking for her at dusk, just as Layla quietly set stones into a pendant frame. He stood outside, hands in pockets, as if afraid to break the delicate stillness of the space. This? He pointed at her design. Is it for sale? No, she replied. It's for remembering. It's remembering what? That not everything broken should be thrown away. Some cracks are worth keeping, because they tell the story of who we once were. Ethan said nothing. He stepped in and stood beside her. No touching, no interrupting. Just standing there, like a silent presence that momentarily quieted the past. Layla looked up at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the man who bought her with a contract. She saw a human being, with broken dreams, invisible burdens, and perhaps someone quietly patching himself back together too. That night, they had dinner together on the back porch. Nothing fancy, just grilled chicken and a little red wine. Layla brought her small speaker, playing old French classics, the kind she liked to work to. When night had entirely fallen, Ethan suddenly asked, If it weren't for your family, would you have agreed to this? Layla didn't look at him. She looked at the sky, where the Milky Way blurred beneath the city lights. No, she answered softly. I would never choose a life with an expiration date. Ethan lowered his head. Her answer seemed to cut something inside him, but he didn't argue, didn't explain, just nodded slightly and finished his wine. They sat there late into the night, saying little more. But in the silence, something had changed. It was no longer distance. It was a quiet understanding that needed no explanation. That night, Layla returned to her room, but didn't lock the door like usual. She left it slightly ajar, just enough that if someone wanted to enter, they wouldn't have to knock. No one came. But her sleep, for the first time in weeks, was light, like a wordless jazz melody, cradling her in a delicate feeling. She didn't dare breathe too hard, because between two people who once felt like strangers, a bridge was quietly being built, from moments without names. The morning after, Layla woke up early, a strange feeling settling in the air, as if something had quietly shifted. Sunlight poured through the glass window of her room, radiant and gentle. Last night, she didn't hear the heavy silence of a foreign house. Instead, a warmth lingered from the smallest of moments, a simple breakfast, an old story, and Ethan's gaze, no longer as cold as the first time they met. Layla chose a beige silk dress, cinched lightly at the waist. The large mirror reflected a woman whose eyes had grown deeper, proud, yet no longer tense. As she descended the stairs, she heard piano notes drifting from the living room, low, warm tones, uneven but strangely focused. Ethan was seated at the old piano, sleeves rolled up, his long fingers moving across the keys like he was trying to rediscover an old memory. Layla stood silently on the staircase, watching. "You know how to play?" she asked softly as the music stopped. Ethan turned, slightly flustered, as though caught doing something he rarely revealed. "My mother used to love listening to Chopin. I learned a few pieces to make her happy. Haven't touched it in years." Layla walked closer, taking a seat on the extended bench beside him. "Play something again. Let me hear." Ethan's eyes softened briefly. He began playing a short piano piece, unpolished yet straightforward, the melody echoing through the spacious room. Layla tilted her head and closed her eyes. There was something different at that moment. No longer the transactional exchange of a contract, but the quiet meeting of two deeply buried parts, unspoken and unforced. That afternoon, Layla received a call from a local fashion brand, inviting her to showcase her jewelry designs at an upcoming exhibition. The news should have thrilled her, but when she hung up, she sat in silence. Was this a real opportunity to stand on her own, or just another part of Ethan's support package? When he came home, Layla asked directly, "Did you pull strings to make them call me?" Ethan paused, his gaze steady and sincere. "I mentioned your name, but the rest, that was your talent. They chose you for what you can do, not because of me." Layla said nothing. She hated that he was right, hated even more the way her heart softened, knowing this man wasn't just someone with power, but someone who truly wanted to see her shine. That evening, Layla accidentally dropped an old photo frame while organizing her sketches in the studio. Inside was a young Ethan standing beside a woman with blonde hair and a gentle smile. She knew immediately it was his mother. "Was she gone long ago?" Layla asked when Ethan stepped in. He picked up the photo, his fingers brushing softly over his mother's face. "When I was 20. A snowstorm. She didn't make it home in time." His voice lowered, carrying a sorrow never spoken aloud. Layla suddenly felt the urge to reach for him, an instinct. She placed her hand over his and squeezed gently. Ethan didn't pull away. She felt the ice between them beginning to crack for the first time. That night, Layla couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling back to Ethan at the piano, to the look in his eyes when he spoke about his mother, and to the slight tremble in his hand when he touched hers. She decided to go to the kitchen and make some tea, hoping it would settle her. But as she passed the living room, she found Ethan still there, sitting in the glow of a warm amber lamp. He was holding a glass of red wine, his gaze far away. "Can't sleep?" Layla asked quietly. "There are some things that aren't easy to let go of," he replied, his voice rough. Layla stepped closer, pulling out the chair across from him. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence, and sometimes silence is warmer than 1,000 words. Ethan set down his glass and asked slowly, "Layla, have you ever thought, maybe we could try living like real people, not just because of a contract?" The question stunned her into stillness. She didn't answer immediately. She just looked into his eyes, and in them saw a part of him that had never revealed itself before. Raw, honest, and deeply human. When she returned to her room that night, Layla left the door slightly ajar, not locked. A door cracked open, like a response not yet spoken. Ethan stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at that door, before quietly returning to his room. He knew some moments, if touched too soon, would shatter everything they had been trying to rebuild. But he also knew they were no longer where they started. Her heart, like his, was turning toward a different path, a path not planned, but right with every breath. The Chicago rain that afternoon fell like the city was releasing an old love song. Not a stormy, angry rain, but soft as silk, descending onto brick-paved streets, quieting the noise of urban life. Layla stood beneath the awning of a small cafe near Lake Michigan. Her loosely curled hair was slightly tousled from the rain, her face bare, touched only by a misty sheen. She looked real. Ethan was 15 minutes late, not because he was busy, but because he had been sitting in his car, watching her through the glass for a long while. She didn't hold an umbrella, didn't shield herself. She stood there, like a melody with no lyrics. Yet anyone who heard it would feel it. And Ethan, the man who once believed everything needed an apparent reason to exist, finally understood what it meant to pause, to watch someone. "You walked in the rain?" she asked as he finally approached. Ethan ran a hand through his damp hair and gave a faint smile. "So did you. Different. I didn't have anyone to drive me. You chose to get out 3 blocks early. Some roads aren't meant to be driven. Why? Because you need time to sort through how you feel." Layla looked at him, not with suspicion, but with quiet curiosity. Ethan didn't explain further. He knew. She was starting to understand what he didn't say. They went inside, sitting in their usual corner near the old piano that was sometimes played on weekends. Today, it was silent like them. After a long pause, Ethan finally spoke. "The contract ends in 3 weeks. Layla nodded. "I remember. I meant to bring it up sooner. But I realized some things can't be decided on a schedule." She slowly turned the coffee cup in her hands. "What do you want to change?" "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I just know that when I wake up these days, the first thing on my mind isn't revenue or ROI. It's whether you slept well last night. It's the necklace you left on the sketch table. It's the thought of you sitting at breakfast with an empty chair if I were to leave." Layla didn't speak, but her heart, quietly and steadily, expanded in her chest, each beat like an unspoken melody. Ethan continued, softer. "My brother once told me, you'll know it's love when the person makes you quieter, not louder. You make me want to listen to the world and myself." Layla looked up. Rain danced outside the window, tilting the linen curtain like a whisper. "And I used to think," she said, "that if I ever left you, I'd feel relief. But lately, I wonder if relief sometimes means losing something that mattered." There was no period at the end of that sentence, because Ethan had slowly placed his hand over hers, not to possess, but to acknowledge. That between them, though they began with a contract, there was now something no clause could contain. That day, Ethan took Layla somewhere she'd never been, his mother's old house in the northern suburbs. A small home, painted soft cream, with rose vines crawling along the walkway. No bodyguards, no gates, just a place that once held genuine warmth. Ethan opened the door and let her enter first. Inside, it smelled faintly of old books and dried lavender. Layla touched the clarinet resting on the shelf, then turned to him. "My mother taught me to play," Ethan said. "After she passed, I locked this house, never came back. Why bring me here today? Because you're not afraid of my wounds. You see them, and you don't turn away." Layla placed her hand on the wooden wall, as if touching a part of his past, silently, without judgment, only presence. Ethan stepped forward, standing behind her. "Right here," he whispered. My mom used to sit all night sewing dresses for church girls. She'd say, anything made by hand is never out of style. Layla turned to face him. And what about things made with emotion? Even more timeless, he replied. The afternoon drifted by under pale sunlight. Before leaving, Ethan placed an old photo of his mother and Layla on the wooden table. Not because they looked alike, but because to him, they were both women who knew how to turn loss into something beautiful. Ethan stood outside her room in the usually cold Whitmore estate that night. He didn't knock. He didn't reach for the handle. Layla had left the door open. He stepped inside. No questions. No signals. She was sitting on the bed, her eyes lifting gently, as if waiting for a song she knew the words to, though she'd never heard it before. Ethan didn't touch her at first. He just sat beside her, looking at her as if for the first time. And Layla, who once vowed she would never give her heart to the man who bought her, knew, without a doubt, no one could buy this moment. Because this moment was the result of all the times they hadn't touched, spoken, or admitted, yet hadn't left. When Ethan finally leaned down to kiss her, there were no fireworks. Just the scent of rain drifting through the cracked window and the sound of their breaths intertwining, gentle as a transition in a ballad. That night, they didn't love each other with words. They loved each other with quiet trust. The one thing no contract can ever hold power over. And outside the window, the rain kept falling, like the old clarinet, softly playing the final melody his mother once taught. The morning after, sunlight quietly poured through the tall windows, spilling across the folds of the sheets, still holding traces of warmth. The room was bathed in a soft glow, like the breath of someone just waking from a dream, not vivid, but deeply real. Layla opened her eyes, not because of an alarm, not out of habit, but something inside her was shifting, a wave, not overwhelming, but persistent. She turned over. The space beside her was empty. Only the faint dip where Ethan had lain remained. And his scent lingered on the pillow. Oak wood, black tea, and something distinctly his. Like a melody you only truly hear when you close your eyes. Layla sat up, wrapped the blanket around her, and stepped onto the balcony. The early breeze brushed gently through her tousled hair. Below, the garden glowed in autumn hues, amber, crimson, and gold, layered like a painting made with emotion rather than technique. Ethan was down there, wearing a dark brown turtleneck, coffee in hand, gazing toward the distant lake. She didn't need to call. He felt her looking. And he turned, lifting his cup in a quiet greeting. That smile, light as if they'd belonged to each other long before they met. That entire day, they said little about the night before. No one mentioned it. But everything had changed, from how their eyes met on the stairs to how their hands brushed in the kitchen. Between them was a kind of silence, not awkward, not restrained, but like a painting whose colors hadn't thoroughly dried. No one dared touch it, afraid to smudge the beauty that had just begun to take form. Layla spent most of her time in the studio, but didn't draw today. She sat at her desk, staring at an unfinished design. All the stones, the carved shells, the trimmed metals she'd worked on for months, suddenly looked too neat. She no longer wanted perfect lines. She no longer wanted to hide the cracks. She picked up her small pliers, removed a polished gem, and replaced it with a broken shell fragment. Jagged, asymmetrical. But when the light hit it, it glowed like fire. Layla knew exactly what she was doing. She was letting truth enter her art, and perhaps her life too. That evening, Ethan unexpectedly invited her out for dinner. Not a five-star restaurant, no dress code, No candle towers or scattered rose petals. Just a tiny Italian place tucked in an alley in Lincoln Park, somewhere he used to go as a student. She was surprised he remembered such small things. But when he shared that he once waited an hour in line to eat authentic handmade Naples pasta, she laughed. Laughed like she was listening to someone rediscover a forgotten part of themselves. They sat by the window, listening to the soft patter of rain outside, sharing lasagna and red wine. Ethan told her about the first investment deal he lost, because he forgot to sign the paperwork. Layla told him about the first pendant she ever sold, to an elderly woman who didn't understand social media but said, "You have eyes that speak truth without words." In between those stories, they laughed, and in between the laughter were glances that lingered just a bit longer each time. On the way home, Ethan pulled over by the lake. Layla looked at him. "Why stop here?" "Because I think, if I don't say this now, I might never be able to." He turned to her, no longer guarded, and wearing the face of a man who controlled everything. "What began between us was fake, but what's growing inside me isn't. It's real enough that it scares me." Layla looked at him. Her heart was still, not cold, but calm, like the lake before moonrise. "I'm scared too," she whispered, "because if it's real, the cost isn't just emotion." Ethan nodded. "It's freedom, trust, and the past we both haven't fully let go of." The wind blew. It was cold. But Layla didn't shiver. She lifted her hand, placing it against his cheek, not as discovery, but as confirmation. "We don't need to name it yet. Let's just let it grow the way it wants to." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if swallowing something heavy, then smiled. "You're right. The most beautiful things come when we stop trying to control them." That night, in a room where contracts and pride no longer drew lines, Layla lay beside Ethan, her head resting on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Not rushed, not broken, just steady. She knew. They hadn't said love, but that didn't make it any less real. Because some things, when they truly belong to each other, don't need a name. They need to stay and breathe in sync. The clock in the study clicked softly as the hour hand touched 12. Outside the glass window, Chicago lay silent beneath a moonless night. The city shimmered like a mirror of itself, reflecting all its brilliance, and all the empty spaces no one ever noticed. Layla sat in her studio, bathed in the warm yellow glow of the desk lamp. Half-finished sketches, scattered semi-precious stones, and unshaped molds surrounded her. But tonight, she wasn't drawing. She sat motionless before a blank sheet of paper, a pencil resting in her hand. Her heart no longer panicked at the thought of Ethan, no longer ran from nameless questions. But the closer she got to something that felt real, the more she realized she was standing between two worlds. One was Ethan, logical, measured, but starting to reveal a heart. The other was herself, a woman who once vowed never to be led by feeling. That contradiction was not easy. The next morning, Ethan left the house early. He didn't say where he was going, didn't leave a note. Layla woke alone, glanced into his room, and saw the bed neatly made. His absence made the grand estate feel strangely hollow. By noon, a courier delivered a thin envelope addressed to her. No name, just one soft line written on the front. "You should know this before things get harder to explain." Inside were faded photo prints, the ink slightly smudged. But the images were clear. Ethan and a woman, embracing in the hallway of a luxury hotel in New York. Layla felt something drop inside her chest. Not a crash, not a shatter, just a small click, like a door locking quietly from the inside. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just sat down and stared at the photos, as if trying to read a foreign language written in skin and glances. No explanation came with them, no timestamp. But Layla's heart whispered, did this happen before they became close, or after? She didn't want the answer. She just wanted to breathe, to separate herself from everything. That evening, when Ethan returned, he sensed something was off when he stepped inside. The scent of lavender from her room was gone. The warm lights usually glowing down the hallway were dark. The house had stopped breathing. He knocked on her door. No response. When he pushed it open, the room was empty. Everything was in its place, except her. On the desk was a letter, this time in her handwriting. Short, without anger. I need a few days, not to leave, but to find myself again, before it's too late. Don't look for me. If I still want to stay, I'll return. Layla took a night train to a small lakeside town in Wisconsin, a place her mother used to take her every summer. There was an old wooden cabin, maple leaf-covered paths, and benches by the lake, where she used to sit and draw for hours as a 14-year-old girl. She rented that same cabin. No internet, no TV, only wind, rustling leaves, and the soft sound of rain tapping on the weathered roof. She didn't sleep that first night. She spread her paper and drew non-stop without template, perfection, or intention. She drew like she was unraveling everything she'd ever held too tightly, letting the wind take it all away. She drew Ethan, but not his face. She drew his eyes. His hands were on her back, his profile when he didn't know she was watching, the music he played when he thought he was alone. And in those lines, Layla realized, she wasn't angry. She was afraid. Afraid that if she stayed, she'd lose herself. Afraid that if she trusted, one day it might all break again. Meanwhile, Ethan didn't sleep for 2 nights. He called everyone he could, but no one knew where Layla had gone. He used to think he could control everything, his emotions, her life. But her silence was the first lesson he never expected to learn in freedom. And in those days without her, Ethan began to write, something he had never done before. Not emails, not reports, not investment strategies. Letters, handwritten, clumsy, raw, from a heart untrained in confession. He didn't know if she would ever read them, but he wrote. 1 letter each night, never sent. To remind himself, he wouldn't try to keep her with words, logic, or contracts if she came back. He would let her choose. Because love is not about holding on. Love is letting someone return freely if they genuinely want to. The clock in the study gave a quiet click as the hour hand touched 12. Outside the window, Chicago lay still in the hush of a moonless night. The city shimmered like a mirror of itself, reflecting all its brilliance, and all the empty spaces no one could see. Layla sat in her studio, warm yellow light bathing unfinished sketches, scattered semi-precious stones, and half-formed molds. Tonight, she wasn't drawing. She just sat there, a pencil in hand, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Her heart no longer raced because of Ethan, no longer fled from unnamed questions. But the closer she got to something that felt real, the more she realized she was caught between 2 worlds. On one side was Ethan, logical, measured, yet slowly revealing his heart. On the other side was herself, the woman who once promised never to let emotion lead the way. That contradiction wasn't easy. The next morning, Ethan left the house early. He didn't say where he was going. He left no note. Layla woke up alone. She glanced into his room and saw the bed was neatly made. His absence made the vast mansion feel strangely empty. By noon, someone delivered a thin envelope. No name. just a soft line written on the front. You should know this before things get harder to explain. Inside were blurred photo prints, the ink slightly smudged, but the images were clear. Ethan and a woman are embracing in the hallway of a luxury hotel in New York. Layla felt something drop inside her chest. Not crashing, not shattering, just a small click, like a door quietly locking from the inside. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She sat down and stared at the photos, as if trying to decipher a foreign language written in her skin and eyes. No explanation accompanied them. No timestamp. But Layla's heart whispered, did this happen before they became close? Or after? She didn't want to know. She just wanted to breathe and separate herself from everything. That evening, Ethan came home. The moment he stepped inside, he sensed something was wrong. The scent of lavender from her room was gone. The warm glow that usually poured down the hallway was absent. The house felt like it had stopped breathing. He knocked on her door. No answer. When he pushed it open, the room was empty. Everything was still in place, except Layla. On the desk was an envelope, this time in her handwriting. Short, no blame. I need a few days, not to leave, but to find myself again before it's too late. Don't look for me. If I still want to stay, I'll come back. Layla took a night train to a small lakeside town in Wisconsin, the place her mother used to bring her every summer. There was a simple wooden cabin, maple-lined paths, and benches by the lake where she used to sit for hours sketching when she was 14. She rented that same old cabin. No internet, no TV, only the wind, the rustling of leaves, and gentle rain tapping on a worn roof. That first night, she couldn't sleep. She unrolled paper and drew endlessly with no form, perfection, or intention. She drew like she was emptying everything she had held in for too long, letting the wind take it away. She drew Ethan, not his face, but his eyes. His hand rested lightly on her back, his profile when he didn't know she was watching, the melody he played when he thought he was alone. And in every stroke, Layla understood. She wasn't angry. She was afraid. Afraid that if she stayed, she would lose herself. Afraid that if she trusted, one day, it would all break again. Meanwhile, Ethan hadn't slept for 2 nights. He called everyone, but no one knew where Layla had gone. He used to think he could control everything, his emotions, her life. But Layla's silence was the first lesson in freedom he never anticipated. And in those days without her, Ethan started to write. Something he had never done before. Not emails, not reports, not investment strategies. Letters, handwritten, clumsy, honest, from a heart that had never been trained to open itself. He didn't know if she would ever read them. But he wrote. 1 letter every night, never sent. To remind himself, if she returned, he wouldn't keep her with words, logic, or contracts. He would let her choose. Because love, it isn't about holding on. Love is letting someone come back freely, if they genuinely want to. And in a small wooden cabin deep in the maple woods, Layla looked at the sky and saw a shooting star streak across the night. She smiled. For the first time in days, she felt peace, because she knew what she wanted was never to run away from him. What she wanted was to return, but with steady feet and a heart ready to love without needing protection. A week passed like a long breath of autumn. The wind still swept through the maple groves by the lake in Wisconsin, carrying the scent of damp earth, dry leaves, and a kind of peace that was raw and unpolished. Layla stayed in the cabin, still writing, still drawing. But in each pencil stroke now, she no longer resisted herself. and a black car stopped outside one rainy afternoon as she quietly brewed tea by the window. She didn't need to look to know it was him, not because of the familiar engine sound, but because her heart had just skipped a beat. Ethan stepped out of the car. No flowers, no pre-written apologies. Only his eyes were tired, but still searching for her like they did the first time. Layla opened the door. Their eyes met, so silent, even the sound of falling leaves could be heard clearly. "How did you find this place?" she asked, her voice steady. "You once drew it," he said, "in a design you thought I hadn't noticed." Layla lowered her gaze. Her heart stirred. Ethan continued, speaking slowly, as if afraid he might break something fragile. "I didn't come to ask for answers. I just wanted you to see I'm still here." She stepped aside to let him in. He entered, and the small cabin suddenly felt smaller. Not because of space, but because every quiet memory filled the room with breath. They didn't say much more. They cooked dinner together, grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, and Ethan brought a bottle of red wine from Chicago. The air between them was no longer taut like a stretched string, but not fully unknotted. Still, every gesture had softened, like two people who had once pushed each other away, now gently feeling their way back through forgotten spaces. Ethan set down his glass of wine and said in a low voice, "Did you know, while you were gone, I wrote letters to you?" Layla looked up. She nodded gently. "I figured. It wasn't to explain," he said. "It was because I didn't want you to think you were easily replaced if you ever came back." She didn't reply, but in her eyes was a faint glimmer, like candlelight flickering over a still lake at night. "That woman in the photo," Ethan continued, "she was someone I dated before you. That photo was taken last year. Someone held on to it to destroy what we've built." "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" Layla asked quietly. "Because I didn't think it mattered anymore. But you're right. I should have told you." Layla's hand tightened slightly around her glass. "I wasn't angry about the picture. I was afraid. Afraid I was stepping into a world where everything could be arranged. Even the heart of the man I was learning to trust." Ethan stood. He walked toward her. Not touching, but close. "Layla, all the things I can buy, none of them matter anymore. But what I can't control is how you look at me. That look makes me want to be better. Not for anyone else, for myself." She met his eyes. For so long, it felt like she could hear both their heartbeats echoing back and forth in that space between them. That night, for the first time since it all began, they lay beside each other, not out of emotion, not out of passion, but to let peace exist between two heartbeats. Ethan lay on his side, one hand resting gently on her hip, light, like a quiet vow. Layla rested her head on his chest, listening to his heart, not fast, not faltering. But this time, it wasn't the beat of a man she didn't understand. It was a calling, deep, honest, and no longer guarded. In the early morning, rain fell. The drops tapped steadily on the wooden roof, creating a soft soundtrack to their waking without alarms. Layla poured the coffee. Ethan sat reading the letters he had brought, neatly folded in an old leather pouch, each line a tender scar. "I'm not a good writer," he said, "but when you were gone, words were the only way I had left not to lose you completely." Layla didn't read them. She didn't need to, because she knew the most important thing wasn't in the writing. It was the fact that he wrote them and kept them, not sent, not demanded, just held on to, like a silent vow. They walked along the lake before leaving the cabin to return to Chicago. The rain had stopped, but the mist lingered like smoke. "What will we do about the old contract?" Layla asked. Ethan gave a small smile. "Rip it up? And the new one?" He paused. "There are no clauses, no expiration dates, just one line." Layla tilted her head. "What's that?" Ethan leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Stay with me, because there's nowhere else worth going." And she knew that among all the crossroads of logic, they had chosen the most fragile path of all, the path of willingness, of love not forced, of two hearts, once strangers, now learning to beat in unison. Chicago unfolded before them like a book just closed, each page still bearing the fingerprints of the one who read it. Everything seemed the same. Tree-lined streets stretching for blocks, glass buildings bathed in sunlight, the distant hum of traffic like the heartbeat of a tireless city. But when Layla stepped back into Ethan's mansion, she knew everything had changed. Not because of the new candle scent in the living room or the rearranged furniture, but because the space now held something unspoken, real emotion. Ethan didn't ask how long she planned to stay, and Layla didn't rush to define anything either. There were no more dry contracts between them, only silence nurtured by trust and patience. On her first day back, Layla returned to the studio. All her unfinished designs lay exactly as she'd left them. But when she picked up a pencil this time, her hand no longer trembled. She drew a delicate silver bracelet with a raw green stone, unpolished, imperfect. In the center was a jagged crack, not hidden, but wrapped in gold, like an admission. Beauty doesn't come from perfection, but from what's been broken and remains. Layla called it True Fault, and she decided to feature it in her following collection. Ethan knew, but he didn't interfere. He slipped a soft partnership proposal into her mailbox, along with a handwritten note. "Only sign this if you truly want to, not out of courtesy or gratitude." Layla smiled. She didn't sign it. But a few days later, the sample bracelet was delivered to Ethan's media team, with a short message. Let it speak for itself. One evening, while reviewing the new designs, Ethan received a call from the board of directors. One of his company's key branches was investigated for labor violations in Southeast Asia. Layla caught a flicker of tension cross his face, the kind that shows when a man used to being in control realizes something has slipped beyond his grasp. "Were you involved?" she asked. Not accusing, just steady. "Not directly," he said, "but I signed off on some approvals without reading carefully. I trusted the regional VP's word." Layla stayed silent, not because she doubted him, but she was waiting to see what Ethan would choose next. Cover it up or face it. The next day, Ethan called a press conference. He stood before dozens of cameras, looked straight into the lens and said, "I was the final signature on those contracts. I have no excuse, but I do have responsibility. Starting today, we will establish a direct relief fund for the affected workers and fully open our supply chain for public transparency. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make things right." Layla watched from her studio, eyes fixed on the screen like watching a piece of herself. She didn't know who Ethan had been before, but the man speaking into that microphone, not hiding, not performing, was the reason she had come back. That night, Layla said nothing. She cooked dinner, a simple meal, pasta with wild mushroom sauce and grilled beef. Ethan sat across from her, his shirt still wrinkled from a long, draining day. "You're not going to ask anything?" He smiled softly. "You already answered," she replied. "Not for the world, but for yourself." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he got up, walked around the table, and sat beside her. No kiss, no touch, just quietly rested his head on her shoulder, like a weary soul returning to the safest place he knew. "For the first time in my life," he whispered, "I'm tired, but I'm not afraid." Layla placed her hand gently on his hair and stroked it. "Because now you know. You're not alone." Layla's new collection debuted at a downtown art exhibit a week later. Not a grand runway, but an intimate space filled with raw wood, warm lights, and the soft strains of live music. The true fault bracelet stood in the center of the room, under a glass dome. Each person who passed by paused to study it closely, as if they saw themselves in it, cracked, yet still beautiful. Ethan didn't stand next to Layla during the event. He kept his distance, quietly present. He didn't need to hold her hand to prove anything. But their eyes found each other in the crowd, and Layla knew he was still there, without needing promises. After the show, they went home. In the elevator, neither said a word. But when the doors opened, Ethan gently caught her hand. "Layla," he said softly. She turned. "Can we start over?" he asked. "Not because of contracts, not because of what happened, but because I never wanted to learn how to love someone. Until you." Layla pressed her lips together. She didn't cry, but inside her chest, a wave broke gently on shore, profound, soft, and undeniable. "There's no need to start over," she said, "because some things, when they truly belong, they don't need to begin again. They need to keep going. That's all." In a city that never seemed to sleep, where people passed each other like everyone was in a rush, two people stood still, not to speak, but to feel. That in a world without a script, they had chosen each other. Not to perform, but to live honestly. Each day, each breath, each whisper, never loud, but never fading. One early winter morning, Chicago shook itself gently under a light coat of first snow. The air was crisp, as if filtered through silence. Everything was covered in a pure white, from the rooftops of tall buildings to the bare branches lining the streets. Layla stood in the kitchen, an oversized sweater draped down to her thighs, a mug of hot coffee in hand, her eyes gazing through the window into the garden behind the mansion. Outside, Ethan stood in the snow-covered yard, holding a shovel, awkwardly clearing a path like a boy assigned chores for the first time. She smiled, a smile not loud enough to be heard, but just enough to soften the corners of her eyes, like the curl of steam rising from her coffee mug. Ethan looked up. As if sensing her gaze, he raised a hand to wave. He said nothing, but Layla understood. Though he could close $1 million deal with a single phone call, that clumsy little wave was the most sincere thing he could offer her that morning. Lately, there was no distance between them anymore. Not because every misunderstanding had been resolved, or because the old wounds no longer hurt, but because they had learned to live with what was still imperfect. Ethan no longer tried to control everything. He let Layla have her schedule, even volunteered to be her personal assistant at exhibitions or client meetings. And Layla, she stepped into his world with the softness of water, not rushing, not trying to change him, just walking beside him when needed. One time, when Ethan returned home stressed from a board meeting where his new staffing strategy had been rejected, he took off his coat, opened a bottle of wine, and sat in silence. He didn't say a word. Layla didn't ask. She pulled a wooden chair closer, sat across from him, and turned on soft jazz. As he poured a second glass, she tilted her head and said, her voice smooth as silk, "Some days, all people need is someone to sit with them, not a solution." Ethan set his glass down, pulled his chair closer, and rested his head on her shoulder. They didn't speak again, but in that silence, the room seemed to expand, enough to hold the weight of their worries and let the heart breathe. Close to Christmas, Layla received an invitation from the National Museum of Design and Craft in Seattle. They wanted to host her solo exhibition the following February. She hesitated. It was a significant step forward, an honor any independent designer would dream of. But it also meant leaving Chicago for at least 3 months. And Ethan, with his packed schedule, couldn't possibly come along. When she told him, Ethan wasn't surprised. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You should go." "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I don't want to keep you," he said, "because I'm not in love with someone who needs to be confined by love. I love you, because you are you." Layla squeezed his hand gently. Something inside her, like a tight string, loosened. Softly, but with a catch in her throat. On the day she left for the airport, Ethan didn't hug too tightly. He didn't make grand promises. He just said, 3 months isn't long, but if someday you forget what I look like, remember, every time it snows, I'm thinking of you." Layla didn't smile. She just nodded, then walked away. She didn't look back, not because she didn't want to, but she feared. If she looked one more time, she wouldn't have the strength to leave. Seattle welcomed her with light rain and the scent of sea salt. The small apartment she rented overlooked the bay, where the sunrise shimmered across the water each morning like shards of a broken mirror pieced together by the sky. Layla buried herself in work. She prepared every exhibit piece, the lighting, layout, and arrangement. But the strange thing was that she didn't feel alone, even far from Ethan. Because each morning, a short email would appear in her inbox from him. "It snowed again last night. Did you know Chicago misses you? I tried the soup you used to make, but it's off. Probably missing Layla. This time, I'm not writing to keep you, just to let you know. Wherever you go, part of my heart goes with you." The night before the opening, Layla received a package. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box carved with images of a lake and maple trees, just like the cabin in Wisconsin. She opened it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, engraved so faintly it had to catch the light to be seen. The true fault is where love begins. Layla pressed the box to her chest. She didn't cry, but her chest warmed, like someone had just whispered her name into the cold night. At the exhibition's opening, Layla stood in the center of the grand room, lights illuminating her face. Guests filled the space, and the press offered praise. But through it all, she kept glancing at the door, as if waiting for something familiar. Then, as the showcase began, Layla saw Ethan under the glitter of handcrafted pieces and soft background music. He stood in the far corner, not stepping into the crowd, not flashy, but visible enough for her eyes to find immediately. He didn't smile widely. He placed his hand over his heart and nodded gently. Layla smiled, and for the first time, in a room full of watching eyes, she stepped off the stage and walked toward that man. Because she understood. Some things can't be measured by numbers or spotlight. They can only be felt with the heart. And she knew, no matter where life took her, as long as that gaze waited at the end of the room, with all its twists and turns, this life would always feel complete. Spring arrived late in Chicago. The cherry blossoms along the shore of Lake Michigan had only just begun to bud. No noise, no show. They opened quietly, like a soft reminder that the most beautiful things bloom only when one is patient enough to wait. Layla returned to the city on a gusty afternoon. The wind wasn't harsh, but cold, the way Chicago always kept its distance, even as it opened its arms to welcome someone home. The car stopped in front of the ivory-white mansion on the corner. Ethan was already waiting at the door. No flowers, no banner. Just him, standing upright, eyes quietly scanning her face for the tired lines, like someone searching for a hairline crack on a precious gem. Layla stepped out, pulling her suitcase, about to smile. But he had already moved toward her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and pulled her into his chest without a word. "You're home," he whispered, as if to remind himself. "I'm still here," she replied, but truthfully. In the days that followed, there was nothing dramatic between them. No upheavals, no sudden turns, just half-eaten breakfasts, because he had meetings, and she had design deadlines. Late evenings lying side by side, each with a book, their shoulders touching on the sofa. Lazy weekends with no plans, where they'd walk in the park or sip coffee at their usual riverside cafe. Ethan was no longer the man who always kept up a perfect front. Sometimes he forgot to shave, fell asleep in front of the TV, or snapped over work frustrations. But Layla didn't mind, because when he growled, "Why can't these people just think like human beings?" she would chuckle, hand him a glass of water and say, "Because they think you're not thinking like a human being either." Ethan laughed. The kind of laugh only Layla could draw from him, one that peeled back all his masks. One day, Layla decided to take Ethan to her mother's home in Savannah, Georgia. A small house, with a backyard full of lavender and mint, a wooden porch, and an old creaky swing that groaned every time the wind blew. Adele, Layla's mother, was a petite black woman, hair tied in a high bun, her voice deep but warm. She didn't ask many questions when she met Ethan. She looked him up and down like a seasoned carpenter examining an unfamiliar piece of wood. Solid, but was it steady? Ethan was a bit uneasy, especially when she asked, "You know how to fix a door hinge?" "I could learn," he replied. "You know how to make mashed potatoes with greens?" "I could help," he said. She nodded slightly, said no more. But that evening, while Ethan was clumsily helping her prep vegetables in the kitchen, Layla glanced in from the living room and saw her mother smile, a genuine smile. And at that moment, she knew Ethan had been accepted. Dinner was cozy, no wine, no fancy candles, just a plate of grilled ribs, a bowl of green soup, and corn cakes from a recipe passed down through generations. Ethan ate slowly, not because it wasn't delicious, but because he was learning to appreciate a world that wasn't measured in achievements or accolades, but in presence, respect, and silences that spoke volumes. After dinner, they sat on the porch. Adele told stories of her youth, the days she worked as a seamstress, the sleepless nights raising a daughter alone, and the man who once promised to stay, but didn't. Layla rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, listening. She knew it was from her mother's unfinished dreams that she had learned to stand alone. And now, as she sat beside a man who hadn't promised anything yet and never left, she understood. She had changed. Not because she had found love, but because she had learned how to love without losing herself. On returning to Chicago, Ethan held her hand the entire ride. The car rolled along the highway, flanked by vast golden fields stretching endlessly on both sides. "Are you scared?" he asked casually. "Scared of what?" "That we might go back to how things were. Drift apart, misunderstand, break again." Layla looked at him. His eyes no longer held the confident gleam of a CEO. They were the eyes of a man terrified that the most precious thing in his life might slip away, and there'd be no way to hold on. She squeezed his hand, gently but firmly. "I'm not afraid, because if that ever happens, I know we won't stay silent again. We'll talk. We'll fix it. We'll stay." if we still want to. And I think we still want to. Ethan nodded. His eyes narrowed, as if to hold back whatever emotion threatened to spill. That evening, when they got home, the cold stone wall behind the living room, once covered in blueprints, contracts, and investment plans, had been replaced by a hand-embroidered tapestry. It was an image of a lavender field, soft purple stretching into the horizon, with two small figures sitting side by side in the distance, not touching hands, but leaning ever so slightly toward each other. Layla looked up at Ethan. He shrugged. From Adele, she said, "It suits the new company culture." They both laughed, and in that laughter, Layla realized something simple yet profound. Love doesn't always need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's a nod, a quiet presence with no need for explanation, a companionship with no conditions. Two worlds, once so different, had found their intersection, not in the grandest of places, but in the quiet spaces where people listen to each other, slow down enough to wait for one another, and dare to place a hand in someone else's without asking, "Where are we going?" Because the answer was already there, in that shared direction they chose to face together. That summer in Chicago came early. The city shed its coat and stepped into radiant sunshine, its streets busier than ever. Yet inside the ivory-white mansion at the corner of Lincoln Park, a subtle quietude crept along the walls and into the spaces between two hearts that once seemed so closely attuned. Layla began receiving offers to teach at art schools. Ethan was nominated for a national board position, an honor many would crave. They were both successful, shining, and busier than ever before. Their dinners together became rare. Their conversations shrank to a handful of polite pleasantries. "How was your day?" "Fine." "Yours?" "Fine as well." Fine. A word so familiar, so safe. Yet wrapped in that safety, they drifted side by side, close in proximity, distant at the heart. One late evening, Layla sat alone in her studio, bathed in warm light. On the table lay her new design, a collection titled The Quiet Distance, inspired by the words, unsaid and fleeting emotions buried under busyness, responsibility, and expectation. The necklace she sketched featured two white and black gems, separated by a delicate silver strand. They didn't touch. They didn't merge. Yet they shared the same chain, like two souls learning to walk beside each other without overtaking. She stared at the drawing for a long time and then whispered, "Are we stepping into that phase?" Ethan came home late. He opened the studio door and saw the light still on. He didn't enter, but stood outside, watching Layla sit with her chin in her hand and distant eyes. He knew that look. He once loved it, for it had been the home of dreams. But now, it left him feeling adrift, like a stranger standing before a painting he once knew by heart, but no longer understood. He didn't call her. He didn't step inside. He turned and walked upstairs. The quiet routine of adults choosing silence over potential hurt. The next morning, Layla woke early. She meant to walk to the nearby bakery as usual, but she found a small box on the shelf when she opened the pantry. No wrapping, no ribbons, just a quiet object that seemed to have been waiting to be discovered. She opened it. Inside lay an old-fashioned key, heavy and cool, alongside a small note. "There's a place I once kept just for myself. Now, I want you to come. If you still want to walk this path with me." No name, no date or time. But she knew. Ethan no longer wished to stand still. That place was a small house by Lake Geneva, 2 hours' drive from Chicago. Built of oak wood with a gray shingled roof. Not glamorous, but cozy. Pines whispered around it, and the lake lay still, mirroring the sky. Layla stepped inside. Everything remained untouched by time. The worn wool blanket, the offset family photo, a stack of old books by the window. On the table sat a thick journal, Ethan's handwriting across its pages. She opened it. These were his private diary entries, never before shown to her. The day my mother died, I didn't cry. I was afraid if I did, I'd lose control. I learned silence, because in my world, emotion is a weakness, a tool others use to doubt your strength. When I met Layla, I thought I could control this, a contract, clear terms. But instead, she unraveled me. There were nights I lay awake thinking, if one day she leaves, will I have the courage to hold on? Or will I choose silence, like I did with everything meaningful in my life? Layla turned to the final entry. If you're reading this, it means you came. And if you're still here, let's learn to speak again, even if it's just a whisper. She closed the journal and stepped onto the porch. Ethan stood quietly by the lake, hands in his pockets, gazing into the distance. Layla joined him. No words. After a moment, Ethan spoke. I used to think, if you love someone enough, just being by their side is enough. But I forgot. Love doesn't feed itself. It needs to be spoken, asked about, acknowledged. Layla turned to him. Her eyes softened. And I thought, if we understand each other well enough, we don't need words. But I was wrong. I began guessing for you. And you started withdrawing. The wind brushed past them, cold, yet comforting. Ethan finally looked squarely into her eyes, for the first time in weeks. I'm not good at saying, I love you, but I'm ready to learn. If you teach me. Layla nodded softly, then whispered, low and steady like a jazz piano. I don't need you to learn how to be someone else. I need you to learn not to stay silent, with yourself and with me. They didn't embrace. They didn't cry. But in the small space between them, a truth was affirmed, deeper than any flourish of words. They didn't want to lose each other. Not out of habit, not out of fear of being alone, but because, amidst millions of people, they had found one another, through cracks, incompleteness, silences, and now, through the things no one had dared to say. And that was real love. Autumn settled over Chicago like a dark brown cloak, gentle and tinged with nostalgia. The leaves on the trees lining the streets had started to change color, falling one by one in no rush, like they had made peace with time. Layla sat inside the quiet white mansion at the large wooden table, flipping through a dense planner, its pages filled with meetings, classes, and a few television interviews. Beside her, a glass mug of herbal tea still held traces of warmth. Ethan entered through the back door, sleeves rolled up, the scent of wood stain lingering on his wrists. He had just finished repairing the old swing in the garden, the one Layla always joked was one good sway away from snapping. They looked at each other, no greeting necessary. But in their gaze was the journey they had walked together, a place where words were no longer required to begin again, because everything now was deeply familiar. Ethan poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the kitchen counter, and looked at her. I think, he said slowly, it's time we rewrote the contract. Layla looked up, eyebrows raised slightly, a surprised smile curving her lips. What contract? The fake marriage contract, he said, emphasizing the word fake with a knowing tone. It needs an update. She rested her chin on her hand and smiled. What do you want to add? Ethan walked over and placed a blank sheet of paper in front of her and a fountain pen in purple ink, her favorite color. No clauses, no expiration dates, No financial commitments. Just one single line. Layla held the pen, looking at him, waiting. He said, "If one day you find no reason to stay, just remember, I'm still here, waiting. Not to hold you back, but so you'll know. You'll always have a place that's yours." Layla didn't write anything. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into a drawer beneath her sketches and design contracts. That drawer was where she kept the things most important to her, even if a signature never bound them. In the following days, they lived as if this life had always been meant for them, but had only been delayed too long. They didn't try to do anything grand. No vow renewals. No public declarations of love. No taken photos posted online. Just mornings, where Ethan woke up early to make toast, even if he always burned the edges. Evenings, where Layla lay listening to him read, though she often dozed off mid-chapter. Moments on the couch in the living room, sitting in silence, their hands still finding each other, like the months of drifting apart had never happened. One day, while walking through the park, Layla stopped in front of a second-hand shop. In the window was a dark mahogany photo frame, its corners slightly chipped, but beautifully hand-carved. Without much thought, she stepped inside and bought it. That night, she placed the frame on her desk. Inside was a candid photo taken by Lake Geneva, Layla laughing, her hair tousled by the wind, while Ethan wasn't looking at the camera. He looked at her, his eyes soft, as if the world outside the frame no longer mattered. Ethan came in, saw the frame, and smiled. "We don't take enough pictures," he said. "We've lived more than we've posed," Layla replied. At the end of October, Layla received an invitation from Paris. A prestigious art academy wanted her as an honorary advisor for their program, Craft and the Philosophy of Making. A rare opportunity, but it meant 3 months away from Ethan. Again. She hesitated, but this time, Ethan was the one packing her suitcase. He slipped a handwritten note into her coat pocket. "You don't have to choose between your dreams and me, because I'm the one who loves your dreams." Layla read those words in a hotel room overlooking the Seine. Her eyes stung, but her heart glowed. The day she returned, the first snow had fallen. She didn't announce her arrival. She rolled her suitcase straight home. The door was unlocked. Ethan was cooking something in the kitchen, flour dusting his sleeves, jazz playing softly from the speakers. She stood in the doorway, quietly watching him turn. His eyes met hers, and didn't look away. Neither said a word. Ethan set down the spoon, wiped his hands on his apron, walked over, and held her tight. Later, on that freezing night, curled beneath a thick wool blanket, Layla turned and whispered, "Ethan, do you ever get scared?" "Scared of what?" "That one day, everything might fall apart again." Ethan stayed silent for a moment, then turned, resting a hand gently on her cheek, his voice low like a forest wind. "I'm not afraid of falling apart. I'm only afraid I won't have the courage to rebuild." Layla smiled, her forehead against his. "Then, if it happens again, let's rebuild it. Together." Ethan nodded. And in that moment, every fracture in their lives felt sealed, not with something perfect, but with a promise that was imperfect yet deeply sincere. Because love, in the end, isn't about finding someone who never hurts you. It's about finding someone who, when everything breaks, still chooses to stay. Not out of duty, not out of habit, but the heart needs no further reason once it's chosen. Winter passed like a slow piano piece, sometimes intense, sometimes silent, but always ending on a lingering, gentle note. Snow blanketed the rooftops, and covered every worn path in the garden, where each footprint had now become just a memory, resting beneath the frozen stillness. Inside the house, firelight flickered in the hearth. Layla sat curled in an armchair, holding the book she had left unfinished since the previous month. But today, she wasn't reading. She turned each page slowly, like someone touching an old journal, not needing to read to remember, because she had lived it all. Ethan placed 2 teacups on the table. He had learned to brew tea like she liked. No sugar, a few dried lavender petals, and water just below boiling to preserve its gentle aroma. A kind of attentiveness that needed no reason other than love. They had lived together for nearly 2 years since the day that so-called contractual marriage began. But no one mentioned that contract anymore. It remained somewhere in a safe, not torn up, yet never needed again. Because the things that truly matter don't always need paperwork to be real. One March day, as the snow melted and the wind began to carry the scent of damp earth through the city streets, Ethan took Layla to a vast open plot of land on the northern outskirts. The grass was still tinged yellow from winter. At the center stood a small wooden sign, handwritten in white chalk, "Future home of the Lavender House." Layla turned to Ethan, surprised. Lavender? It's a home for those who were never chosen, the ones who thought they had to be strong alone. We will build a place where they can come, rest, and learn to love themselves before loving anyone else. Layla smiled and stepped beside him, gently running her fingers across the wooden sign. She understood. This was legacy. What remains after all the storms, not wealth, status, but how a relationship can heal the small, quiet worlds of those who once felt alone. That year, they didn't throw a lavish wedding. No white dress, red carpet, or public declarations. Just one quiet afternoon by the shore of Lake Geneva, where everything had once begun again. Layla wore an ivory linen dress, her hair braided, and she held a bouquet of pale lavender. Ethan wore a white shirt, no tie, just a sprig of rosemary pinned to his chest, as a quiet vow, enduring and pure. They exchanged promises, not because the law required them, but because they had come to understand that in a world so unpredictable, what truly matters is not who comes first, but who chooses to stay in the end. That evening, back at their old house in Chicago, the one they still hadn't moved out of, Layla stood in her studio, gazing at the large painting on the wall. It was finished, a piece titled "Belonging." In it were 2 figures sitting beneath the eaves of a small house, a field of purple lavender stretching endlessly in the background. They weren't looking at each other, but the light on their shoulders met, softly, steadily. It is as if, in any place, under any circumstance, one would always be the other's way home. The love story between Layla and Ethan had never begun like a fairy tale. They didn't meet by fate. They didn't fall in love at first sight. They came together for logic, for benefit, for calculation. And that was their truth. Because love isn't reserved for the flawless. It belongs just as much to those who once feared it and hid their hearts behind contracts, old armor, and silence. Sometimes, love blooms most beautifully when it's not performed like a movie, but lived exactly as it is. A presence, a choice, a journey, not short, but deep enough. If you've made it this far, perhaps somewhere along the way, Layla and Ethan's story touched a memory or a dream of your own. You once entered a relationship for the wrong reasons. Maybe you once believed you weren't meant to love or be loved. Or right now, you're wondering, is there someone out there patient enough to learn how to love me correctly? The answer is yes. But first, you must choose to believe, not in them, but in yourself. Because the moment you stop searching for love, and start living it. Love will find you. If this story made you pause or smile softly to yourself, leave your thoughts below. Share what it is about love that's made you wait so long, or tell us which chapter of your own story you're writing. Don't forget to follow the channel so you don't miss stories like this. Subtle, soulful, and honest. Because here, every story we tell, it is a quiet reminder that you deserve a love that needs no contract, only truth and enough.